Fire Eyes Media.
What Melissa Left, a limited series by Weird True Crime.
Before we begin today, let's take a breath. If you've been with us since the start of this series, you've come to know Melissa, not as a case, but as a person, someone her family never stopped fighting for.
This is the episode we hoped we'd never have to make. For 11 months, Melissa's family held onto every possibility, every version of hope. They searched, they advocated, and they refused to stop asking questions. And in late May, that long wait met the hardest answer there is.
On May 28, 2026, remains were found at McGaffey Ridge in Carson National Forest. 2 days later, on May 30th, it was confirmed. They belonged to Melissa Casillas.
Today, we're going to walk you through how Melissa was found, what was at the scene, and what the evidence does and doesn't tell us. And as always, everything we share comes directly from official reports, documented evidence, and statements from Melissa's family and their legal team. I'm Gina.
And I'm Amber. This is What Melissa Left, Episode 5, May 28th.
Before we get into May 28th, we need to briefly address something that caused a lot of confusion in the weeks leading up to Melissa's discovery. On Wednesday, May 13th, 2026, around 12:30 p.m., a report came in of a body discovered in an area called Rio Chiquito. For a moment, it raised hopes that Melissa had finally been located.
And the person who made that report was Ray Cortez. Yes, the same Ray Cortez we told you about in episode 4, the man connected to the alleged phone call on the day Melissa disappeared. According to Ray, he was out shed hunting with his son when he spotted smoke on a mountainside. He went to investigate and saw what looked like a man lying motionless in a bar ditch. That's the shallow drainage trench that runs alongside a road. With no cell service in the area, he used Apple's satellite texting feature to get someone to call 911, then started driving back down the hill, and as he was leaving, the body moved.
It turned out to be a living man, someone who had been out with friends the night before, gotten severely intoxicated, and accidentally set the mountainside on fire. The good news is the fire was put out, and the man was fine. Hungover, but fine.
Here's why we're telling you this. Because that May 13th report circulated publicly. It created some confusion about when Melissa was actually found. And because Ray Cortez was the one who reported it, rumors started spreading that he was also the person who discovered Melissa's remains. We want to be clear, he was not. The body Ray reported on May 13th was that of the intoxicated man. It had nothing to do with Melissa.
But we'll say what you're probably already thinking. It is curious that Ray Cortez's name keeps surfacing in this story.
Let's talk about where Melissa's remains were found in McGaffey Ridge. This location is extremely remote. It's described as roughly a 7.2 to 7.3 mile round trip, up and down canyons, not a straight line walk.
Previously, we stated that this area had already been searched. But we kind of misspoke. While the area below the ridge, which is easier to navigate on foot and horseback, had been searched, this extremely remote area on top of the ridge had not been.
It's also important to discuss the current restoration project happening at McGaffey Ridge. This area of the Carson National Forest is heavily impacted by insects and disease. In 2023, the McGaffey Forest and Rio Grande del Rancho Watershed Restoration Project was approved. This project covers 30,000 acres south of Taos. According to the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Forest Service, the goal is to, quote, restore forest and watershed health within the project area through timber harvesting, thinning, and prescribed fire, end quote.
So, why are we talking about this? Well, while the ridge is remote and hard to trek, there's also work being done in this area. You can't help but question whether or not Melissa had been there the whole time. The difficulty of the terrain is also important to note because it makes it highly unlikely that Melissa chose to hike to a secluded spot in a national forest to end her life, as some have speculated.
The family's lawyer, David Adams, addressed the suicide question directly and simply. Sierra had just graduated. Melissa was planning a new life in Albuquerque. She felt guilty for not being there for her parents enough, and she was actively making plans to change that. A parent in that position who loves their child the way Melissa loved Sierra, that parent does not walk into the mountains and leave.
There's something else that makes the family question how long Melissa's body had been at McGaffey Ridge. Black bears, mountain lions, coyotes, and vultures call this forest home. So it begs the question, would her remains have been that intact if she'd been exposed to the elements and wildlife the entire time?
There are only a few things we know with absolute certainty about the state of Melissa's remains. 1. Her remains were skeletonized. 2. She was wearing the same clothing seen in the video of her dropping off Sierra's lunch at the John Dunn shops, but the clothing was sun-bleached and almost colorless. 3. A gun was found next to her.
Any news report stating that Melissa did or did not have a gunshot wound to her skull should be taken with a giant grain of salt. And I say that because, as of the day this episode is released, Melissa's family has yet to sit down with the New Mexico State Police or OMI, the Office of the Medical Investigator. They haven't been given a cause of death or told the specifics of the autopsy report.
Let's talk about the gun. In our very first episode, we told you that Mark told Melissa's mother that all the guns in the house were accounted for, and that Melissa didn't know how to use a handgun. We told you that wasn't true. Melissa was a hunter. She owned a handgun and carried it.
We now have statements from two of Melissa's close friends that paint a very specific picture of how she carried that gun. Both friends independently describe Melissa carrying a full-sized pistol, like a 9mm or a .40 caliber. One friend described it as kept in a holster under the front seat of her car. Another described her carrying it in a waistband holster. This was not an occasional thing. Melissa was known to carry her gun on her most of the time, and especially when she was out in the mountains.
It's very interesting that a gun was found next to her after Mark was adamant that she didn't own one. We don't know what type of gun it is, and we don't know who the gun belongs to. There will be a firearms trace conducted through the ATF's National Tracing Center. The ATF will then trace the gun's chain of custody to the person who first bought the gun from a licensed dealer.
From there, the New Mexico State Police will determine if and when the gun changed hands after that, whether that means it was sold privately, gifted, stolen, and so on. We understand it's easy to jump to the conclusion that this gun was Melissa's, but we don't know that with any amount of certainty right now.
Melissa's parents and family have requested a wide range of tests be performed on her remains, including bringing in a forensic anthropologist to examine what was found. In cases like this, a full report can take anywhere from several months to over a year, which is why the family has yet to receive a cause of death.
And that isn't necessarily a bad thing. The fact that they're being this careful before determining a cause of death or releasing more details about what may have happened to Melissa suggests that the New Mexico State Police and the Office of the Medical Investigator are taking their time to get the answer right.
But while the analysis of Melissa's remains is hopefully being handled properly, we've since learned that the location where she was found was not processed the way it should have been. According to the family's attorney, David Adams, a field investigator with the OMI joined New Mexico State Police for the initial processing of the scene. In an investigation like this one, most people would assume that means all of the evidence was collected and taken in for testing.
But after the scene was processed, And after New Mexico State Police indicated all evidence had been removed, some of Melissa's family members decided to make the hike up to where she was found. It's their account of that trip up to the ridge that tells us just how remote and treacherous the location is.
And when they got there, they discovered that significant biological and forensic evidence was still at the scene. Evidence that law enforcement should have already recovered. No family grieving the loss of a loved one should ever have to see what Melissa's family saw on that ridge.
The family photographed, collected, and documented what was found. We've been cleared by the family's attorney to share these details publicly, in part because some of this information is already circulating online, and he wants the accurate version on record.
Let's get into what was found. Hair. Hair that didn't belong to Melissa. But unfortunately, that's all we can say about the hair without compromising the investigation, and we'll share more when we can.
There were shredded pieces of clothing with what appears to be blood on them. It's hard to tell whether the fabric, which looks like denim, was cut with a knife or scissors, torn by hand, or simply broke down from time spent out in the elements.
There was a wrapper of some kind and what appears to be a tobacco pouch, specifically a lower lip nicotine pouch. As far as we know, Melissa didn't use tobacco products like this, so it'll be interesting to see what DNA testing reveals.
There were also soil deposits that may contain biological material. According to the family's attorney, the family collected a sample of it, wanting to confirm that New Mexico State Police had it too. But one of the most disturbing finds was several human bones. Based on our understanding, these are likely partial remains left behind by the New Mexico State Police.
Let that sink in for a second. We understand that small items can be missed or that investigators might process a scene and reasonably decide certain items far enough from the body aren't relevant. But how do you miss a significant number of bones belonging to the victim?
I'm sure Melissa's family is asking the same question.
There was also a torn shoelace, ripped in a notably strange way. Another of the more questionable items found at the scene, close to where Melissa's body was located, was a set of several small pieces of paper. The papers are very small and clearly make up a larger portion of what is probably an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper.
There is typed text on the papers. While it's impossible to know what the text is without piecing it back together, there are a few legible words that lead investigators to believe it's some sort of legal document. We have no idea what kind of legal paperwork it is, so we won't begin dissecting it.
Most notably, the papers had handwriting on them. Trudy, Melissa's sister, verified it is Melissa's handwriting. When asked why the pieces of paper weren't collected, the New Mexico State Police agent told Trudy the wind kind of blew them away and just left it at that.
Unbelievable. But the wind also raises an important point. If that document had been in the elements for 11 months and the wind was blowing it around the day the scene was processed, how is it possible that so many pieces of the paper were found? Wouldn't the wind have blown all of them away by that point?
It's highly probable. And David raised a forensic question regarding these papers that's important to put on record.
I would have to believe somebody's going to do a forensic analysis about whether or not that paper could have stood the hardship of winter and the seasons changing and not having the ink bleed through or it just dissipate into nothing. That to me is everything. If you had an expert say, no, this couldn't have been out for 11 months. Here's the weather pattern for this area that took place. Here's the amount of snow that happened. And based upon my experience, this is impossible. Then you have a scenario of going, okay, so are we saying that she went up there way later or she was brought up there? And at least it opens those doors, right?
That question David raises is a big one. If a forensic expert determined that paper couldn't have survived 11 months of snow and weather on that ridge, then it wasn't there for 11 months. And if it wasn't there the whole time, someone put it there later. That's the door David is talking about opening.
And it's the kind of testing that costs nothing to request and could tell us a great deal. All of the evidence found by Melissa's family has been turned over to the New Mexico State Police. Hopefully, they take the necessary steps to determine how long that paper was on that ridge and what it says.
There's one more piece of evidence that was found at the scene. That, in my opinion, is crucial to this investigation. In the last episode, we broke down some questionable details about the day Melissa went missing, including the report of a woman screaming, the blood found in the bedroom, and Mark's unprompted explanation to the New Mexico State Police that there's no way a struggle could have happened in that house.
Among the evidence left behind, there was a piece of LECA. LECA stands for Lightweight Expanded Clay Aggregate. Some plant enthusiasts call it LECA, but the use remains the same. LECA are small clay balls that have been heated until they expand, creating a porous structure that works well as a soil substitute for certain houseplants.
Melissa was known to use LECA for her alocasia plants because New Mexico is very dry, and this soil substitute helps retain moisture. Remember, Melissa was a plant lady. She did her homework and knew how to help even the most finicky plant thrive.
She also introduced Trudy to LECA, who now uses it for her alocasias. In several pictures taken inside the Casillas' home, there are multiple plants in clear vases full of LECA. Some of these plants are on top of a dresser in the master bedroom, pushed up against a window with severely bent and broken blinds.
On top of that dresser and the rug in front of it are pieces of orchid bark and soil. Orchid bark is another soil substitute used for plants that need an airy substrate. To us, it looks almost as if the plants on top of the dresser had been knocked over or disturbed, and some of the substrate fell out.
Not far from that dresser, next to the broken blinds, is where the droplets of blood were found. We don't know what occurred in the room that day, but it's fair to ask the question, if something did happen there, could Melissa's clothing have picked up a piece of LECA during an altercation and then ended up on the ridge?
We're not claiming to have the answer, but it is worth asking how a piece of LECA, the same substrate Melissa had throughout her house, ended up on top of McGaffey Ridge with her remains.
So how does all of this evidence, some of which seems crucial, get left behind? David Adams has addressed this directly. His read is that investigators were likely exhausted by the extreme terrain and the difficulty of the hike, and that this affected their thoroughness. He is careful to say that is an explanation, not an excuse. Because the discovery of a firearm and what appeared to be an unattended death should automatically trigger homicide-level protocols. Full stop.
There is also a contamination concern. Under a tree near the remains, the family and search and rescue team found freshly peeled orange peels. New Mexico State Police has since confirmed in writing to the family's attorney that those orange peels were left by their own crime scene technicians. New Mexico State Police characterized them as far enough from the body to be irrelevant. David disagreed, and here's why it matters.
If a defense attorney can point to orange peels left by law enforcement at the scene, they can argue that other items, the tobacco pouch, the hair, the torn clothing, might also have been left or disturbed by investigators. It creates a chain of custody problem that could undermine the evidentiary value of everything found there. That is a serious issue, and the family's legal team is focused on it.
David also stressed that the family has turned everything they recovered over to law enforcement. Evidence analyzed outside the official chain of custody isn't useful in court and creates exactly the kind of problems a defense attorney looks for. The right move was to hand it over, so they did.
So what's next? Attorney David Adams is in communication with New Mexico State Police, and so far that communication has been strong. A meeting with the family will be arranged to review the status of the investigation. David has been deliberate about maintaining a working relationship with the New Mexico State Police, even while pushing hard on the systemic failures.
David has also been direct about a broader pattern he sees in cases like this one.
Clearly, our justice system has had an inadequate response to all of these types of cases. I think domestic violence, sexual assault, and murder cases are all tied together. For instance, if you have a strangulation case, there's stats that will show you you're 600% more likely to kill an intimate partner in the future if that case is unprosecuted. And so you look at that history, and to me, it seems almost like common sense to go, oh, this is why we're in this situation. Because even though we've been in existence for 250 years, we're just in the beginning stages of really looking at the harm that's been done to an entire gender in our country. And in many situations, harm that goes without any justice. And so the laws are in dire need of change on many, many levels, and so that's a state issue and a federal issue when it comes to the Violence Against Women's Act. As you can imagine, there are a ton of people that don't support the Violence Against Women's Act. That in itself makes the hair in the back of your neck stand up, because when the stats can be presented to people that can make these decisions, yet they can justify that funding these particular issues is not that important.
What David is describing isn't abstract. It's the exact pattern we've been walking you through for 5 episodes. Across this series, we've talked about the reports of arguing in the Casillas home, the woman's scream a neighbor heard, the blood, and the questions surrounding Mark's behavior. David's point is that when warning signs like these go unaddressed, cases don't just stall, they escalate.
And that's what makes his statistic land so hard. Melissa was a mother, a daughter, a sister, and a friend. She was a whole person with a life she was building with her daughter. When a system treats these cases as lower priority, it isn't treating them as the life or death situations they so often are. Melissa's family is fighting to change that so the next family doesn't have to.
If you have information about Melissa's case, anything at all, and you have tried the New Mexico State Police tip line and not heard back, please contact Parnall and Adams directly. We are linking their information in the show notes. Please do not let your information go unheard. It could be the tip that pulls all of the pieces together.
Melissa Casillas was a reader, a hunter, a plant lover, a devoted mother, and a woman who signed her name in the book she gave to the people she loved. She grew pink and peach poppies. She listened to audiobooks on the drive to work. She felt guilty for not doing enough, even when she was doing everything.
She deserved better than what happened to her. She deserved better from the people who were supposed to investigate her disappearance. And she deserves justice. Her family will never stop fighting for it, and neither will we.
As of the release date of this episode, the investigation into Melissa's death is ongoing. We will continue to update you as developments occur. Until next time, stay safe.
And make good choices.
Bye.
Bye.